We spent 6 weeks cooking and studying chili con carne, made a video, and eventually I found myself asking, what would I do if I entered the World Championship Chili Cook-Off? So I thought, let's do it together. We'll go through the whole thing from scratch, the thought process, the ingredient selection. We'll cook, taste, and judge. Let's do it. Like many recipes, we start by asking, what do we want from the dish? What is the dish? For me personally, it's a chili-forward dish. The chili is the star, and everything else is there to help the chili shine. So with that in mind, the selection of chili is vital. Traditionally, Ancho Colorado or red ancho chili, either fresh or dried. In contemporary recipes, people often add guajillo for the fruity notes or other Mexican chilies to reinforce or enhance the ancho. Some people add cayenne to help with the kick, and you have the option to use paprika for the color. But the star is here. So what does it offer? For me, dried ancho is one of the most complex chilies out there, and you have such a broad range. On one hand, you have the deep, complex, dried fruit, dark notes, dark chocolate notes. But on the other hand, in the same chili, when done correctly, you have this incredible brightness. It's vibrant. It's very fruity. Almost has this phantom acidity that lifts the whole thing and balances the complex dark notes it offers. So our job is to not get in the way of greatness. And for that reason, I prefer dried to fresh. Also, I don't have access to fresh, and I like to use a lot, just like the olden days, where the ratio is at least 1:1 chili to meat. So we have the flavor and aroma spectrum. What else do we want from the chili? Color, the signature dark red color, and presentation is important. A mild kick, and body in the form of the pulp. So how do we get what we want from our chilies? A very important thing to note when dealing with chilies, on, well, for that matter, many ingredients, is to know what dissolves in what. For example, when you walk into a supermarket, you can buy chili oil, but rarely do they try to sell you chili water. That is because the majority of the goodness dissolves in fat, color, and all that beautiful aroma we just talked about. So for this dish to work, we know fat is key. Another thing to consider, besides what dissolves in what, is how long they'll stay. With heat, the dark complexity, they're good. 5 hours, no issue. The bright top notes, they're heat sensitive. Having cooked the many older recipes, I find the 30 to 40 minute mark to be perfect. Anything after that, the brightness starts to fade. So it's worth considering doing this at least in stages. Now, the meat, once again, we ask, what do we want from the meat? Well, A, we want body. Body first in the sense of actual body, providing substance to the dish, but more importantly, in our case, body in the form of gelatine, connective tissue, collagen, breaking down into that wonderful mouth-coating jelly goodness that will solidify the moment the dish becomes cold. The reason why it's so important is because, once again, that bright, fruity, blah, 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 top note we talked about, it's very sensitive to starch. I've experimented just adding a bit of starch slurry to thicken the dish, and immediately it kills the majority, if not all of the brightness. And it is for that reason I personally wouldn't add beans to my chilies, not for the authenticity debate, but simply because beans, they release a lot of natural starch, and that dulls the flavors. So if I were making a bean chili, I wouldn't go through the effort of using dry ancho. I would use ancho powder or just chili powder. Nothing wrong with that, but if we're looking for the top notes, we avoid starch, and that's why roux is also out of the question. So the only way to thicken is by having gelatinous meat and reducing quite aggressively. For that reason, we're using beef cheeks. It gives us a good amount of gelatine. It satisfies the 3-hour cooking time if we cut it into maybe 6 pieces. It's not fatty because I want to control the fat. So that kind of eliminates short rib and oxtail. And for me, I don't want to taste the animal fat. I want the animal fat to help the chili shine. And beef fat is neutral enough if you must, like chuck and short ribs, doable if you skim at the right time. Beef shin is amazing if you have more than 3 hours. And for that reason, we also rule out using lamb or mutton because the flavors are just way too distinct, and that starts to clash with the chili aromas. Of course, if you want to go above and beyond, you cook this in veal stock. The third thing we want from the cheek is the beefy, meaty flavor, but in a mild way. So for that reason, we're not even going to sear it. We're simply going to poach it and add it to our dish later on. For me personally, with limited understanding, chili con carne, in terms of flavor profile, is closer to Hungarian goulash than to a French meat stew. So, as much as it pains me to say, the Maillard reaction, that kind of complexity might not be what we're looking for, especially if we want this to shine. Next up, we have pork belly. Obviously, we also get gelatine from the pork belly, but we get fat. And many of you, for anyone who's looked into older recipes would know, lard was almost mandatory in chili. And for me, it's a superior chili cooking fat, even compared to tallow, for the reason it's a bit sweeter, as sweet as animal fat can be. It's slightly thicker in terms of mouthfeel. If you render both, you kind of see the difference, especially if you use like something like guanciale. And this gives me control because I know pork belly doesn't need 3 hours. So I can afford to poach that, simmer that, take my time rendering the fat, getting mild Maillard reaction here, getting a bit more complexity, but not overpoweringly. But not enough to overpower. And this gives me the bonus of the skin, which will cook separately and later blitz it so that we really disperse the yummy aroma of the chili. And one thing to note with pork belly is that not all bellies are created equal. We have a deep dive somewhere here, which you can watch after this video. What we want from this is the top 5 layers. So after we isolate the skin, we want the fat, the flesh, the fat, the flesh, and one more layer of fat. Anything after the 5th layer, it's a bit more obvious here. This is good for soups. It becomes that the fibers are thicker. It becomes a bit chewy and a bit too distinct. What we'll do is we would isolate this layer and add it to simmer with our cooking liquid. So we get all the water-soluble meat umami, the good stuff, out of it, but it will not affect the texture of our dish. Oh, let me wash my hands. Aromatics. This is when we ask what the major ingredients need from them. So we go old school with garlic, lots of garlic, with long cooking time. So none of that pungent, in-your-face garlicky taste, but you get the savory notes, the almost like this, like roasted complexity. Will give you a bit of depth and some subtle sweetness that would balance the potential bitterness, more on that later, of the dry ancho. And in terms of spices, which I didn't prep, we'll deal with that later, we'll use some cumin that will give us just some background earthy note, once again, to enhance that earthy note from our chilies. Now, what's missing from all our ingredients, or from the stars? And I always like asking this question. For chili con carne, we don't really have an umami element, an umami bomb. And I always like to ask where the umami is anyway. Do we have umami? Yes, in the form of meat umami. But we can do better. And in order to do better, let's talk about very briefly what is umami. And in my very ill-informed head, it's what makes savoury more savoury. And it's way more tangible than people give it credit for. You have four things. Bear with me. One, pure umami, glutamate, the G of MSG. So just picture adding a lot of MSG, that's what you get. Extremely savoury. But there's more to it. We have IMP, sorry for the abbreviated terms that I don't even understand, but it's basically meat umami, savouriness from fresh meat, but usually in much more concentrated form in dried meat. In Japanese dashi, you have katsuobushi, dry shaved skipjack tuna. You can also find it in anchovies, ham, and when they are together, they really take each other to the next level. Which brings us to our multiplier, GMP, mushroom umami. Only found in dried mushrooms, not fresh, because somehow the drying breaks down the cell walls and releases the kraken. But on its own, not very significant. But when used with one or the other, and particularly together, this multiplies everything. And it's a wonderful addition whenever you make a meat dish. To not overpower the dish, we're not going to use the actual mushrooms. And this will also fail the garnish requirement. Basically, if you add something, it has to be in every single bite. And we're not going to chop this up. And we don't want to taste the mushrooms anyway. But we'll soak it, make a dashi out of it, and we'll add just enough to multiply. And of course, to give us a bit more earthy note to work with all our other earthy elements. Now, with that out of the way, I'm going to prep quickly, and competition rules allow for pre-prepping, and then we'll cook. So, everything dried has been soaked somewhere, everything chunky has been cut small. We found the cumin. The only thing is we're not allowed to cook the chili until the competition starts. So 3-hour clock somewhere. Let's soak the dry ancho. Boiling water. And this brings us to the only curveball thrown to us by this incredible ingredient, the soaking liquid. It is temperamental in terms of the bitterness. On a good day, there's just the perfect balance, a hint of bitterness that balances the richness and the complexity of the whole dish. On a different day, extreme bitterness. And the soaking liquid does have a lot of the fruity note, a bit of the spiciness. So you never know. The key is we taste and we decide how much of this to add. And of course, once you introduce a bit of bitterness, we need to balance accordingly, especially with sweetness. Now we cook. First up, Pot 1, beef cheeks, which takes the longest. And in essence, we have one pot dealing with things that dissolve in water, the other with fat. We add our dashi. We're using a tiny saucepan just to keep everything concentrated. I probably made a bit too much dashi. Close enough. Bring in some heat. We add our pork skin from the belly. If we can fit the chewy part. Oops. Very concentrated now. And we take the opportunity to skim off a bit of the so-called scum, not because we're trying to make a beef consommé, but because the cheek is quite a hard-working muscle. And without pre-blanching or skimming, for the flavor profile that we are trying to achieve, it can come off a bit irony, sometimes even metallic, depending on how hard-working the cheek is. And for the pork skin, it removes any potential unwanted gamey flavor. Now we start to season. First up, the salt element, not salt, in the form of fish sauce. Yes, it smells very fishy now, but the marine funk is extremely heat sensitive. What we'd be left with is that length element we just talked about in umami. Because of the fermentation, it will give us not only a ton of extra umami on top of the dashi and the mushroom, but this will give us the length and make everything linger. So we max out the salt quota, 0.6 to 1% salt of the combined weight of our meat. If we were really joining the competition, I would suggest to adjust to even 1.1 or 1.2 at the end. Sadly, because of game theory, we'd all be better off if we salted a bit less and the judges could taste all the beautiful flavors. But if everyone has very salty food and you give them something that's not salty, that's not going to work. Now, we add all of our mushroom soaking liquid, cold dried date for slow release of sweetness to balance the potential bitterness and the earthy flavor of the chilies. And just to give the flavor and the complexity a head start, we drop in a tiny bit of our ancho. We let this simmer. Get a head start, side. Now we play with the fat. Pork belly, diced into about lardon size, just to make the cooking faster and the rendering easier. Remember, no salt from now on until the adjustment at the end. And we're not adding anything yet because we want to first fully render all of the fat, or at least the majority. Then we decide how much fat we want to keep in our dish, because once you skim after the ingredients, we start taking away the wonderful fat-soluble aromas. And we want maximum concentration. Now, the boiling sound has turned into sizzling, meaning we evaporated the majority of the surface moisture. Started to render this wonderful pork fat, taking on some beautiful color in the process, developing some complex, meaty, roasted notes, but mild roasted notes via the Maillard reaction. And now, we skim, control the fat. Look at that. I'm taking most of it because I know the belly will release more. We'll need just enough to get the garlic and the cumin going. That's plenty. This is for the chili. That note, garlic. Should have done this during prep. At least half a head. Garlic for savory depth, subtle sweetness. It actually doesn't matter because of the long cooking time, whether you add it now to the fat or to the liquid, because all the pungency is going to go away. But we just don't want to add it too late with the chilies. Otherwise, you actually taste the garlic. Am I adding this? Because they will disintegrate. Perfect. Now, we mix cumin, background earthy note. This we do toast to get the fat solubles going. Now we combine the two. First, just a bit of this umami liquid, the glass the pot, making sure we're mopping up all the beautiful burnt bits, concentrated savory goodness. A bit more than that. One clean bottom, everything in. Now we go. Perfect. Now we taste to see where we are. Amazing. Wow. Okay. And then we taste the soaking liquid to decide how much bitterness we want to introduce to this, or whether we're introducing bitterness at all. Oh, this is so fruity. Oh, it's a good day. Good day for soaking liquid. Let's add quite a bit. We taste as we go. Oh, it's so beautiful today. Okay, a bit more. We can always add a bit later. But I find with the bitterness, it becomes more mellow if you give it more time, so that's why we're doing this. And not adjusting right at the end. Oh, not just adjusting right at the end. So, now this goes to simmer about 2 hours to give us enough time to do the chili. Now the star of our show, the ancho, into whatever blender, mixer you have. By the way, 2 things to note. 1, I've tried pounding with pesto mortar. For this dish, 0 difference. 2, and more importantly, often many recipes, my older ones included, call for the dry toasting of the ancho before the soaking. Once again, because of the long cooking time and its eventual exposure to a ton of fat, it makes 0 difference in practice, at least for my palate. So that's why we skipped it. Seeds removed for texture, of course. Vein removed for better spice control. If you want it spicy, you can always add cayenne for some cleaner heat at the end. We add a tiny bit more to help form a kind of paste. It makes the texture better, but the sweating and cooking harder. You can do it the other way. Sweat it first, then blitz. That would save you from quite a bit of splashing. So I don't know why I did it this way. Good enough. Let's cook. Now, because we're taking the fat on a journey, we first skim the extra rendered fat. Let's float it to the top in our beautiful pot. As usual, always. A pot for fat, and a pot for water. Perfect. Everything looking good. Goes back to your side. Continue simmering. Pot. Grab our pan. all this yummy fat. Don't splash a bit because of the accidental liquid skimmed. But then with the chili, it will splash anyway, so. And now, only now, we top up with the rendered pork fat. 0 dilution. And with this dish, you need fat. You really need fat. When I was a kid, I would order Indian food. Then, for whatever reason, maybe for health, maybe watching my weight, I would skim off the excess fat on top. And then question why the dish was tasteless. Of course, all the good stuff from the garam masala were in that layer. What was I thinking? Same with mapo tofu. You skim off the red oil from mapo tofu, you taste salt. We can afford a bit more, to be honest. For me, my favorite dish from the whole timeline cook was the one that had both tallow and lard, even though it used dried chili powder. Because of the sheer amount of fat, it really made the dish alive. Okay, I think we're good. All right, now the scary bit. There's no good way to put it. Nothing goes to waste, so first this part. We'll blitz it with the cooking liquid later to really clean this, so don't worry too much if something's stuck. By the way, you don't have to do this stage now. Well, you can do it about an hour before you're done. But because we started soaking, I don't want this to keep soaking and keep losing more beautiful flavors to the soaking liquid. So we sweat this and I'll blitz that. Now gentle heat. We once again evaporate the water content from the soaking. Concentrate the flavor, then allow the chili to impart its fat-soluble aroma and color, as you can already see. Toasting everything slightly in the process to get whatever reaction we can get out of them. To talk about what's fat-soluble, what's water-soluble, just look at the difference in color. They even take on different hues from the same thing. Crazy, huh? Needs a bit more fat, I think. You see, even if we're using all the fat, separate them, let them travel in different tracks, and you can always control. Oh, looking good. Now we taste. Perfect. Perfect. Rinse this with this liquid. Nothing goes to waste. Give it a good mix. I also want to add a bit of cacao to heighten that chocolatey note, but maybe towards the end. So now, we stop the cooking here, keeping all that brightness, all the top notes. Leave it on the side, let this finish simmering. T-minus 20, they go together. Whew. All right, let's start with, this is T-minus about 40 minutes. Let's start with what we would like to see. But first, let's fish out the potentially chewy pork. Well, the fact that this is breaking apart was very encouraging, because I was worried I didn't give the cheeks enough time, or I cut them a bit on the chunky side. So this comes out, looks very yummy, to be honest. Skin comes out, preserve it. We save it for our gelatin bomb later. Okay, everything is quite encouraging now. All right, let's see where we are with the cheeks. But in all honesty, to take the stress away, if you were using this for a competition cook-off that has a 3-hour time limit, cut them smaller. I did it so that we could preserve a bit more of the juicy inside, the gelatine, so that we kind of shred it last minute. But, okay, this will shred, so that's all good. Oh, so good. All right, finish the dish. This goes back to the side. We have our Tex-Mex sambal of some sort. We'll heat it back up slightly, and we gradually start to introduce a bit of liquid. Oh, look at that. This is actually similar to a technique used in Southeast Asia, where they cook the chili paste or the spice mix with fat until the fat splits and then kind of gets reabsorbed so that the fiber acts as an emulsifier. Gradually add the liquid. The only reason I'm doing it this way is I reserve the right to reduce the remaining liquid rapidly at much higher heat without scaring the heat-sensitive aroma away. So we know the pork belly is going to fall apart easily. We'll start with that, and once we work the liquid a bit, we'll add the meat, kind of shred, but not fully. Reduce this, reduce that, and adjust the seasoning. Oh, the smell is incredible. Wow, look at that. Look at that. Well, a bit out of focus, but well, now look at that. Okay. Oh, we need to fish out the date at some point. But yeah, let's first do the cheek. 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 You know what? The date might have disintegrated. Oh, no. It's here. Found it. That'll be one tasty date. Honestly, if you're in a hurry and actually in a competition, you can't just do it in one pot. You don't have to do this. Now this we reduce rapidly. Medium-high heat-ish. This beauty, we treat gently. Start breaking the cheek apart. Just about right. So yes, if you do have a 3-hour limit, make them smaller, or use feather blade. We cook much faster, equally tasty and gelatinous. Maybe not as gelatinous. Oh yes, now, look at this. Look at this, wow. You can see what I meant by the body, both in terms of real body and in terms of the gelatinous liquid. And the fiber, of course, from the chilies helped a lot. In fact, this is so thick that we might need a bit more liquid to thin it so the bottom doesn't catch. Look at this. Look at it. Wow. Oh yeah, we can afford some more liquid. Oh. We might not need to reduce on the side, if I'm honest. You see, the moment you add the liquid, it disappears. Whew. melting pot of dark chocolate, scented with chili. Oh, look at this. Well, now we just smother it for 20 minutes. Oh, one thing I forgot. I should have done it earlier. I would like to add the smallest dash of white wine vinegar, red wine vinegar. A, to reinforce the top fruity notes, and B, to balance all that richness. And we add it earlier, not at the end, just so the heat has time to cook off the harshness. Acidity does not evaporate with heat. So we're not getting rid of the acidity. We're just rounding it in what is already a very rounded dish. Of course, we have to taste. Look at this beauty. So good. Wow. Now the bitterness comes through, and I love it. And we can afford a bit more adjustments later. We simmer and mother while we reduce this. Whew. Really good. Wow, really, really good. All right, final touches. Look at this. I don't know how many of you guys watched the timeline video, but in our army recipe, it was heavily thickened with rice. But just look at this. No rice, no starch, no flour. This is the texture, consistency you can get with gelatine. This texture is beautiful. Ooh. Taste. Right. Ooh. Now, our gelatine bomb. Not washed, nothing goes to waste. And we practically have a bit of fresh, bright chili flavor here. Pork skin. Oops. Very gelatinous liquid. Again, a dash of cold water just so this doesn't explode. Clean the thing. Yep. All right, let's go. This is braised pork skin, equivalent of double cream. Might change the color a bit. Mostly because of air bubbles, so that will go away. Very carefully now. Now we can bring back a bit more heat to reduce a bit further. Look at that. Okay, maybe not that much heat. We don't want this to catch. Final touches in terms of taste. So we taste again. So good. Wow. When the bitterness is just right, you've won the Ancho lottery. So initially I had some raw cacao powder here in case we want to introduce a bit of bitterness, but I think it's perfect. In fact, we have some date syrup here, and we already introduced date, of course, to the cooking liquid. Just a touch to balance this amazing earthy bitterness. Just look at this. Can you see this? Look at this. All right, we taste. Oof. Touch more. But not too much. Small dash of red wine of red wine vinegar. Very small now because we don't have much time to cook off the raw edge. But we want to give it a bit more brightness because we just added a bit of sugar. Now, salt. No more fish sauce. We don't have time to evaporate the marine funk. Sorry, no, salt. Yes. Almost don't want to add black pepper. I worry then that would tilt the earthy balance. Because now it's perfect. Okay, salt. Again, if you're entering the competition, salt a bit more. Add a bit more of everything. Nash always wins. Oh yes. Look at this. Just look at this. Crazy, huh? Well, we can do even a bit more salt. So 1.2 is not crazy. Look at that. Replate. I mean, talk about length, the peptide. Took me 5-10 minutes to set up the cameras again, during which I probably had 3-4 sips. All I could taste, still, the chili. It's incredible. Just look at this texture, my God. Reminds me a bit of Brazilian feijoada, which actually, similarly, has a lot of rendered pork fat, but because of the cooking method, worked perfectly into the dish. But you can't see the fat. You can taste the richness, but that's cut through by the bitterness, by the brightness, by the acidity, by the heat. I mean, what a dish. I mean, chili in general, not my dish. Just chili con carne. What a dish. All right. Let's taste if I were judging this. Perfect texture. So complex, but so balanced. It's still balancing itself. It's crazy because you get so much. You first don't get the heat. You get the You first get the richness. You actually get quite a bit of the beefy goodness, but not overpowering, like shin, but beautiful beefy goodness. Then you get the richness, almost as if you're having a black bean stew, a feijoada. It's that rich, that thick. You can't taste the pork fat in isolation. Then the chili comes in. Then you get the dark fruit, the dark chocolate, almost slightly toasted chili flavor. Then you get the heat. And while you're getting the heat, and at the tail end of the dark fruit, you start to get the brightness. Not like sharp in your face brightness, that as if you were biting into a fresh red chili, but complex brightness, if I may. Let me just, sorry, refresh. Like bright acidity. Not vinegar in your face acidity, but fruity acidity. You don't taste the sweetness, but it's very rounded. And it lingers. It lingers like Iberico pork. Like the best soy sauce you've had with whatever sashimi. It's still there, still changing. It's almost alive. I mean, it's the best chili I've made. And I made quite a few last few weeks. Would it win a competition? I don't know. But let's look at it slightly more objectively. What would I do differently? If competition permits, I might use guanciale just for a bit more depth. Maybe just the skin from the guanciale. I don't know whether that's on the permitted shopping list, because if I were to use the flesh, it would mess up the salt balance. I would not risk too much with the beef cheek. I would have diced the cheeks much smaller, just to not give myself pressure in terms of the 3-hour cooking time. Because if I were to braise beef cheeks whole, I would take 4 to 6 hours. So cutting them small worked, but that was dangerous. And because we had to take a longer pause in between the two shoots, I don't know whether 2.5 hours would give you this result, full disclaimer. Because it was resting in its lukewarm liquid for quite a few hours before we managed to shoot again. I don't think I would do that many things differently. I think this is my personal peak chili. I leave it to you to try it, to refine it, to come up with better ideas, make it your own, make it better. And if you've qualified, which I have not, by the way, for this upcoming competition, I hope there'd be 1 or 2 useful technique, shortcuts that you might consider. Well, thank you for taking the journey with me. I hope you like the new format. Please fire away if you have any questions, and I'll try to answer them maybe in the next episode, should this one work out. This is my competition chili. Enjoy. It's amazing. I mean, come on. So good. All right, that's a wrap.